Hello, my name is Kim Smith. I'm a professor at the business school, and I'm supposed to read this. To our dear Professor Irving, the Bishop James Madison Society would like to thank you for your years of service to the students of W&M Mary. Your personal commitment, wit, intellect, and dedication to students' growth has not gone unnoticed. Whether it is the annual holiday emails you send to every one of your students, past and present, or lectures that somehow make LIFOs and FIFOs seem interesting, you have surpassed being a mere professor to many of us, and have in fact become a dear friend. The College of W&M Mary is grateful to you. You represent at the core everything this institution strives to be. Humble, curious, just nerdy enough to still be cool. In fact, very cool. While your presence at W&M Mary will be greatly missed, it resounds loudly in the hundreds of students you have impacted during your time here. We look forward to seeing all you do in your future endeavors, but know that you always have a home here. This is your college, one that you have shaped and helped to grow in these past 6 years. The Bishop James Madison Society strives to create a culture of mirth, community, and intellectual curiosity amongst those who affiliate with W&M Mary. You, Professor Irving, have done just that. Keep it up. So can we give... I was asked to give a short introduction of Professor Irving, and so as I was in charge of the committee that hired him, I get like points for this, right? I mean, this is important. I remember when we interviewed Jim Irving 6 years ago, I guess it was 7 years ago, that we actually did the interview. And the thing that I remember the most is that he looked at us. You know how he does this, right? He looks at you very directly and very straightforwardly, and he said, I want to be at W&M Mary. I want this job. And I thought, wow, that's really, really, really impressive. And so we were very convinced with our decision to hire Professor Irving, and he has proven us all to be absolutely correct in our view. The thing that has fascinated me as I've watched Professor Irving over his 6 years is the way that you flock to him. And I've watched him sort of have students lined up outside of his office. Some of you know that we recently, Jim and I started a big research project, and I said to him, you know, it would be really cool if we could get some students to work on this. And he said, you know, I'll take care of that. And he comes back like the next week and says, there are 33 students who want to work on this project. I'm thinking to myself, you're kidding. I said, you're kidding. He said, no, totally. You know, there are all kinds of people who want to work on this project. And I thought to myself, wow, that is just impressive. One of the other things that I remember and will always remember about Professor Irving is his strategy in hiring other faculty members. And I don't know if he does this in class, but we would sit down and we would get all these resumes for faculty members, and we would say, who should we hire? Jim would say, I give that person a check plus. This person over here, I give a check. And this person over here gets a check plus plus. And we would sit there and we would say, all right, this is a fabulous way to do things. And so I want to let Jim speak, but I want to say to Jim from the bottom of my heart that Jim, you get a check plus plus.
Okay, so I don't know how I top that, but I'm going to ask Kim to be my slide advancer because a little projector thing doesn't work. But before I get started, let me take a moment and congratulate Professor Smith. She has recently been promoted to full professor, so I think we should return. Terrific achievement. As for this lecture, I'll thank the Bishop James Madison Society, whoever they may be. Literally, this is very cryptic, one of the weirder interactions of my life for giving this talk. I'm certainly very honored to be speaking to you in this, I believe, the 200th year of the Bishop James Madison Society. So, as a side note, I think it's apropos that I give this talk because I was born right around the corner from James Madison, the bishop. So this is not the president, as I understand it, it's his cousin. He was born about 3 hours west of here, very close to my hometown. So I actually have my family here today, and you'll be hearing from them, not hearing from them, but kind of I'll work them in as I proceed. So the way I'd like to unwind this talk is, first I'm going to pause and reflect on the first 6 years that I've spent here, which I guess is kind of the end of the road for me. And then I'd like to identify certain characteristics that I believe makes the W&M Mary learning environment, the W&M Mary culture, so special. So Kim, if you want to advance it. So pause and reflect. So many of you know that I enjoy imagery, symbolism, metaphors, analogies to try to connect to a larger point. And so I offer you this initial image as we get started. And if you can't see it, you can get up and move. I'd encourage you to get up and move. I'll be using kind of still photos throughout. But this is a legitimate, non-photoshopped photo. And if I were to zoom in on the faces of the firefighters, what you would find is they're smiling for the cameras as the home behind them is ablaze. Okay? And so this doesn't make sense, right? And so given the circumstances, this isn't what you or I would expect. But in actual fact, all occupations need practice, and firefighters need practice. So this is a home that's going to be condemned. They set it on fire, and then they take a photo in front of it. And so, great photo of firefighters before they begin to practice their craft. And so I use this photo as a metaphor. If you think of a burning building as the life of a university professor. Okay. So sometimes I have to stretch a little bit, but I'm going to stretch. There's a window for research responsibilities, or maybe 10 windows for research responsibilities. There's a window for teaching responsibilities. There's a window for service responsibilities. There's a window for helping to raise young children. And so this invitation, as I see it, to talk today is an opportunity for me to step away from the burning building that is the life of a university professor, trying to juggle many balls, and to kind of just reflect on why I believe W&M Mary is such a special place. So the W&M Mary learning environment, that would be, kind of the next slide. And so I'll turn to kind of what I mean by the W&M Mary learning environment, what it means to me, and then you can kind of agree or disagree as we go. Silently, if you will, and you can talk together. So, Thomas Jefferson, who was a member of the W&M Mary class of 1672, so this is his 250th year reunion coming up in May, I suppose. He had a vision of an academic community that was more complex, it was more dynamic, and it was more well-rounded than simply downloading knowledge and then uploading it back on an exam. And so one thing that defined my time here, and that was seemingly well received by many of you and other students, and to quote our own Professor Bill Gary, was that knowledge is important, but there are experiences and relationships that are equally as important. And so caring about students, who you are, what you dream of becoming, how we might help to get you there, I think is fundamental to our mission as educators. I don't think any educator in the room today would disagree with that. And so through my prism, here's how I view the learning experience. And if you want to kind of put it up here, Kim. So the first kind of this pie graph, the green I would say represents right? So, so you can tell I'm not very prepared. So knowledge, right? So knowledge I would allocate 33%. The blue I would say represents experiences. The red I would say represents relationships. And then of course that only adds up to 99%, so the 1% is what? Well, obviously in my course it would be videos. So when I think about what each of you that completed my courses took away from it, I hope that it strikes the same balance. And so for the remainder of our time together today, I'd like to identify 7 characteristics that I see as integral to the W&M Mary learning environment. The W&M Mary learning experience is what makes it, again, so special. And kind of repeat that theme as we go. And so in doing so, I'd like to invite some of you to the stage to join me, as I think of you as embodying these characteristics. So first characteristic is depth, and I'll have Professor Gary come up, and we'll hold our applause until the end, I think, because otherwise this would take a long time. And so maybe the people can just kind of gather behind me. So Professor Gary, I kind of see as, basically resembling depth. And so, as you know, and many of you have been in his class, he's been the dean of the undergraduate business program, and he's also a part of our accounting group at the Mason School of Business. And so, when I think of Professor Gary, I think of the sculpture by Rodin, the thinker. And so, I think of Bloom's taxonomy, which is kind of cognitive learning, where if you look at this pyramid, those three at the top are really important, right? Analyzing, evaluating, and creating. I firmly believe that is so. And if you were to enroll in one of Professor Gary's courses, and many of you have, you'll find the following quote in his syllabus. And this is from noted management consultant Gary. So I'm actually going to step aside and read it, right? So it says, Dakota tribal wisdom says that when you're on a dead horse, the best strategy is to dismount. Okay, dead horse, right? Of course, there are other strategies. You can change the riders. You can get a committee to study the dead horse. You can benchmark how other companies ride dead horses. You can declare that it's cheaper to feed a dead horse. You can harness several dead horses together. But ultimately, after you've tried all these things, you're still going to have to dismount. Okay? And so I see this quote as conveying that a decision-making process, and we talk a lot in accounting about decision-making processes, can be complex, and by extension, you need both intellectual gifts, and you also need to be able to analyze a problem and to simplify a problem. And so, for everyone in the room, you've been endowed with those intellectual gifts. And it's kind of your mission to separate the signal, which would be the best strategy, from the noise, which is all the other strategies. So I'll use depth as kind of my first characteristics of the W&M learning environment. Second, I'm going to ask my dad to come up. So Jim Irving, I'll call him Senior because we share the same name. So when I think of my dad, and you can go ahead forward, I think of steadfastness. And so I think of a lot of different things. I think of him as a role model, probably first and foremost, but I'll kind of in this context focus on steadfastness. And so my dad's investment strategy, if we put up the photo, this is kind of a Wall Street trader during the financial crisis when the markets turned way down. And so his strategy kind of beats this behavior by the market, and so I'll kind of show the other photo, which is that's a mattress, and then there's a whole lot of cash underneath it. Right? So, he's had the last laugh many times throughout the decades. He believes in investing in hard goods and education, and less so in investment securities. And I admire him for that vision of kind of sticking with what he believes. And so by extension, I see William and Mary as resolute in avoiding gimmicks, fads, peer pressure, etc. So steadfastness, I'll kind of outline as my second point. The third person I'm going to ask to join me, because this is all about nepotism, is my wife. Kathleen is my best friend. And so the first photo I've got, before I get back to her, is of William and Mary alumnus John Stewart. And so I think of him as a creative individual. And if you've been in my class, we've seen videos where he talks about tax sheltering and how that's kind of bad for the economy, and he makes light of it, among many other things. I also think of the Wizard of Oz. Wizard of Oz is a metaphor for the creative exercises that I try to use in the classroom. So if we put up the photo, everyone knows kind of the Wizard of Oz, and it's kind of small. But in actual fact, what was kind of going on behind the scenes, which is our next photo, was that there's just a guy, kind of, Morgan is operating the control room and using a microphone to talk to it. And so when I think of Kathleen, as with my dad, I could go on and on. But she's an outstanding attribute is her creativity. And so she's been the architect behind many of the exercises I do in my class. So if you've been in my Principles of Accounting course, we've done the Lego building exercise to demonstrate kind of the process of moving inventory from the balance sheet to the income statement. If you've been in my 302 course In the past, we've done a taste test to kind of illustrate intangible assets, both recorded and unrecorded. And so, by extension, I think the element of creativity is present in the W&M Mary student body. It's something that I love. Your willingness to take risks, whether it be writing creatively, thinking creatively, acting creatively, is paramount to what I believe is a robust learning environment. So creativity. Okay. The next individuals I'm going to have come forward are students that have been in my courses. And I kind of look at the sea of faces here, and I thank you all for being here. And I could literally choose any of you to come forward. I've chosen some people when I was thinking about attributes of the W&M Mary environment that stood out to me. And so I'd like to kind of ask them to come up. And so the first attribute, or the next attribute, will be perseverance. I'm going to have Adrian come forward. And so when I think of perseverance, I think of Adrian. I also think of an athlete in the 1992 Summer Olympics. And some of you may know this person. I've got a photo of him. So Derek Redmond, if you know the backstory, was a sprinter. And during his race, what he prepared his entire life for, he tore his hamstring. And so if you go to the next photo, but he didn't give up, right? He actually limped the entire 400 meters with a torn hamstring, which I've had before and which was very painful, with kind of the crutch of his dad. And so I think of that as perseverance. I think of Adrienne as having similar perseverance. She's worked as hard as any student I've taught at W&M Mary, and it's paid off not only in her exemplary academic record, but also in her future. So let me just kind of tell you, if I'm not mistaken, she is the first W&M Mary student that I know of to get an international Big Four accounting internship. So she'll be in London this summer, which is absolutely very impressive. Also, she's received so many scholarships and awards that I think she's actually making money by going to school. And so I think back to the recommendations that I've written, I should have just charged a 10% contingent fee for everyone. And so I think about Adrian, I think about Derek Redmond, and I think about W&M Mary, and I say you kind of have to forge ahead in the crosshairs of adversity. Oftentimes I think some of the courses here are very difficult, mine included, and many of you struggle with concepts, and then I think that the ones that kind of succeed are the ones that stick with it. So perseverance is a fourth characteristic. Next slide, I'm going to have two people come forward, Will Amante and Matt Clark. And so I'm going to call this just intellectual curiosity. And I'll kind of juxtapose that we can put up two pictures here. So we've got everyone's favorite cartoon character, including my son Jax, Curious George. And then we have, on the other side of the photo, we've got Uncurious George, which would be President George W. Bush. And so when I think of Will and I think of Matt, I think of the times where they try to take more from an assignment than simple task completion. And I look at it, kind of the people in the audience, and I think of the questions you've asked in class that get at how and not necessarily, get at why and not necessarily the textbook, which is very good at telling you how. And so this curiosity has been rewarded in both of these guys' cases. As a true sophomore, William has an internship this summer with Ernst & Young, which I can tell you is unheard of for a sophomore. And as a graduating senior, Matt will be joining Deutsche Bank in New York, a top 5 Wall Street bank this summer. And so by extension, I see curiosity as being a fundamental necessity of a strong learning environment. Okay, I'm getting to the end, right? So the sixth characteristic is cohesiveness. And so I'm going to have Saurabh and Neil come up and join me, if they will. And so I see cohesiveness, and many of you have been in the business school, and many of you know how important it is in the business school to be part of a team. And so this semester, both Neil and Saurabh and two others, and I'll put up the photo of what I call the accounting gang. So Saurabh's on the left, Neil's on the right, and then the other two people I don't think were able to be here today, but Angel Chang and Sang Park were part of this accounting gang. So every Thursday from 4 to 9 p.m., every Friday from 2 to 7 p.m., they were in one of the Miller Hall study rooms working on data collection. And so I asked Neil, I said, would you ever do this again? And he said, absolutely not. But he also said that the learning experience for him as someone that enjoys business and economics was invaluable. And so data collection, as Professor Smith and I know, and maybe if you've done it in another discipline, is very, very tedious. It's very, very difficult. And so to have these guys on board was excellent. And so the team's dedication, I guess, is what stood out, but especially Saurabh and Neil, their ability to kind of be proactive and kind of end up with a quality final product, which isn't always the case with data collection at all. It was very impressive. And so by extension, I see cohesiveness as kind of bonding William & Mary, especially in accounting, the William & Mary, Mason School business, and the broader world. Okay, so then finally, the last person I'm going to ask to join me is none other than Mr. Jack Irving. So a truly special person in my heart, and so you can just stand right here if you want to. And so I'm going to use, before I talk about Jack, I'm going to use a moment from the 2004 Masters. And so if you know anything about golf, this is my favorite athlete. He's a left-hander just like Jack and I, Phil Mickelson, and you can see the exuberance of the crowd when he sunk this putt on the last hole to win the tournament. This is a guy that had tried his whole career to try to win one of these tournaments, and he finally did. And so that exuberance, not only in him, but in the crowd, tells a big story. He's kind of the golfer's everyman. And so if you open up the dictionary to the word exuberant, I firmly believe there would be a picture of Jack. Okay, so there it is, exuberant, right? The pronunciation, adjective. I'm sure all children are exuberant, but Jack takes it to another level. He's as excited on Christmas morning as he is when we have cantaloupe with our dinner. His contagious and infectious enthusiasm, it just makes our household always a positive environment. And so he's a special guy to me, as you can tell. And so by extension, I see this uplifting spirit, which you guys would call tribe pride, as being a significant part of the W&M Learning Experience. Okay, so if we go to the next slide, I have kind of how I'm going to pull all this together, right? So I've given you a bunch of different characteristics. None, they're not all mutually exclusive, but for the most part, they make different points. And so if you were to take depth and steadfastness and creativity and perseverance and creativity and cohesiveness and exuberance, kind of if you melded all the people up here together, I think what you would find is kind of the William & Mary learning environment. And so also, if you took, because I'm an accounting professor and because I find the beauty of numbers irresistible, my talk would be incomplete without trying to use something with these numbers. And so if you punch one time there, so if we take 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 twice, because we had 2 people for 5, plus 6, we'll just make Saurabh and Neil half. It doesn't work otherwise. Plus 7, you get 33, which is the title of this talk. If you go to the next slide, if I step back to earlier in the talk, right, we had 33% for knowledge, for experiences, and for relationships. And also, if you go to the last slide, one of my favorite athletes as a child was Larry Bird. He was number 33, and so I've kind of got a quote that he gave that I'll read. And so it says, I've got a theory that if you give 100% all of the time, things will work out in the end. And so Larry Bird, number 33, and his image is kind of in the background there. And so in closing, I'd like to thank the Bishop James Madison Society. Maybe one day I'll determine who you are. For hosting this event. This is a very, very nice forum. I was a little bit worried when they said the basement of Swem Library. I wasn't sure what I'd find, never having been here. But this is a beautiful site for this. I thank each of you for attending, for coming out on a day when I know exams are next week, starting probably Monday, and I know blowout was yesterday. And so I wish you my very best as we go our separate ways geographically, but never spiritually. So I'll say, go try. Thank you very much.